Hi guys, I'm Sean. I'm from Game of Braves. Joining me today we have Joe and Paul from Diablo 14.
Hi, I'm Joe H.Lee. I'm the game director of Diablo IV.
Hi, I'm Paul. I'm the senior game producer on Diablo 4.
This video is going to be very heavy spoilerish. So if you haven't played the game and you don't want to be spoiled, please don't watch this video. You have like 5 seconds to turn away. You guys ready?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Game of Braves.
I think the first question I ask about is that in the game, because I finished the game, right? So I saw Inarius and Tyrael as bosses in the game.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of storylines and what, I don't think they contribute a lot in terms of lore. But the reason I ask is because Inarius and Tyrael is part of the lesser evils, right?
Right.
And they are such a huge character in Diablo universe. But in terms of the story of Diablo 4, I don't felt any impact from them. So do you guys have anything to talk about this?
Well, of course, the act in Dry Steppes leads to the summoning of Tyrael, so she is integrated into the game in that context. As you mentioned, they are lesser evils in the world of Diablo, and the story here focuses on the creators of Sanctuary, Lilith and Inarius. But we were very happy that we were able to include Tyrael and Tyrael, who are sort of key figures in the history of Diablo. Players who've played previous games will recognize them in a way that makes sense in the context of the story.
At the same time, I think especially Tyrael shows a good example of Elias's motivation and how far Elias wants to go in bringing the mother back, for example. So while it was a smaller beats of story per se, like Joe said, I definitely have the importance of being part of the story of Diablo.
I think there are 3 characters that are very important in story. I think Donan, Nephalem, and Laura. Donan's, I think he had a very tragic death.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm probably not just me, but I felt that when we get to the part where he died, it's kind of unexpected and also very careless. As a player, I felt like it's a bit unnecessary for him to die at that time. So, what's your thought on it?
Well, Donan is a tragic character, and he's gone through a lot with the events in Skazlan, the death of his son, Yoram, in fact, with Astaroth. And we see that further through his interactions forging the Soulstone. A big theme of Diablo 4 is this idea that humans are fallible. They're not perfect. And Donan has made a lot of mistakes. Lilith has made lots of mistakes. That's part of what being human is. When you think about the story of Skazlan, you get to learn the sort of mythos of Donan, and then you get to meet Donan, and you get to the real human who's behind that hero. So he can die like anyone else. He's a human.
Yeah, and then I really feel like you yourself as a human making different choices, right, as a player. And then Tyrael, Donan, Laura, they all face some sort of losses. And then Donan lost his life. Since we're talking about the story, Tyrael loses her mom, she loses part of her body part. Laura maybe have lost his faith over the past years compared to the energetic and youthful Laura that we saw in Diablo 3. Now he's battle scarred, and then he's seen so many things in Sanctuary that he's just done for. Like Joe said, to show as human beings where we can go from there.
I think like Lilith and Inarius such a big character in the game this time around. In the end, did Inarius really die, or he was just merging down somewhere?
Inarius is dead. And
100% is it.
if you think about the lore of Diablo, there's the way that angels are born. That's still the case, but his wings are ripped off.
I think like for the story, like a lot of times where Mephisto keep telling you, hey, actually Inarius is not as good as you think he is. So I thought at a certain point we would be able to battle Inarius. Did that ever came to the game itself?
I think that Inarius is an interesting character because he is not aligned with the player, right? And you see that when he takes the Soulstone, for example. So he's certainly not on the player's side. But their goals sometimes align and sometimes don't align. And I think that is part of what makes him such an interesting character. In the end, it's not just, he was evil, and here's a boss battle.
And I think you can still battle these ideologies through fighting Pendulum Knights. And then especially my favorite Cathedral of Light Catholic Dungeon, you get to really immerse yourself into perhaps something that Inarius has built all these years. I think you can still have that taste of what fighting Inarius meant.
After we talk about Inarius, we talk about Lilith, which is the the biggest character in the game right now. Is she really helping us, or is she not really?
We've talked a lot about how the story of Diablo IV is really just beginning with the launch of the game. And I think that there's a lot to think about with the arc of the story, how it wraps up with Lilith and Mephisto, and where it can go from there. To some extent, like Inarius, Lilith's goals align with those of the humans and the player, and to some extent they don't. And ultimately, you defeat Lilith at the end of the game, but she's not simply an evil character. You get to understand her motivations, and to some extent you can empathize with some of her reasoning.
Yes. I mean, if there is a choice in the game where if you ever ask me to do it, I would be like, yeah, let's join up. Did you guys ever think about like having a different choice of ending?
When we think about planning for the future of Diablo, we want to be able to tell a story that has a sort of a long arc, and so it's important to have events in the story that are contiguous, and so we set it up so that the story can move forward as we're planning.
In terms of lore-wise, are there any like story progression?
Yes. So the seasons will let you interact with other little stories within Sanctuary, other characters, but when we think about expansions, that's where you could expect to see more story.
Yeah, I mean, because the ending didn't really have the conclusion, and Nero ran off with Mephisto. So that was a bit unexpected.
Well, I mean, have the endings to Diablo games ever had that kind of conclusion?
Not really, but I think maybe we could talk about the design of Lilith in the previous games. It was not as prominent, but this time it was daughter of Agent, because Lilith actually had two phases of the boss fight. Do you guys want to talk about like how the design came out for Lilith?
Yeah, well, Mephisto is also a key character in the story of Diablo IV, and from the first moments that you're playing the game throughout. And Lilith is Mephisto's daughter, and so when we designed that second form of her boss fight, we wanted to make sure that you could identify some of the sort of shape language and some of the resemblance to Mephisto, especially if you refer to how Mephisto has appeared in previous games. We wanted players to make that connection visually as well as through the story. Of course, that fight takes place in the area where Mephisto is reforming, so it sort of ties it all together.
So I think this is probably the first Diablo game that Diablo is not actually involved. You guys have anything to say about that?
I think that the story of Diablo has centered on Diablo, but Diablo is one of the three prime evils, right? When we set out to build Diablo IV, we wanted to tell a story about the people of Sanctuary. And so from there, we went out to the creators of Sanctuary, and we wanted to tell a story that included them as characters that were nuanced and developed. And of course, that story from the lore is a story that relates to Mephisto. And so Mephisto figures prominently in the story of Diablo IV. And we didn't want to undermine that sort of cohesion, that the story making sense by sort of forcing Diablo in because his name is on the box. We wanted to be true to the story that we were telling.
One interesting Easter egg, and you mentioned that he wasn't there. You do get to, visit the altars of the Prime Evil, so I thought that was a really nice touch, and we'll go from there.
So when I play the game, I noticed there are a lot of shrines around where you go around and use your emotes to do stuff.
Oh.
Does it have any relevance in the lore or so?
I think we should keep an eye on those shrines as we sort of go forward. We have a lot of stuff to add in seasons. One of the things that's cool about building such a big world like this is that there's a lot of opportunity for our developers to sort of add things to the world that can figure into the game later or not, depending on sort of how the game develops.
Is there a reason why Tyrael was not in the game? I mean, he was mentioned a couple of times. Like, where is he right now? Is there something that you can tell us?
Well, the story of the campaign of Diablo IV is focused on people, on humans, and we've wanted to make sure that it stayed focused on that and that we didn't have an aspect of a powerful entity that comes in and saves the day. We wanted it to be up to the player and up to people like Donan, who are mortal, right? And people like Lilith and people like Tyrael to show that humans can, face off against these sort of mythical figures.
Could you tell me the lores about the Tree of Whispers?
So the Tree of Whispers is this tree in Hawazar in the swamps. Players led to it by this sort of snake, and it's unclear, to what extent the snake is, and it's very symbolic of the swamp itself. The tree is such a cool end element, and trees like this have appeared in other myths. But in Diablo, it's this tree that has all of these heads hanging from it. And the heads accumulated over a long period of time. The heads don't agree with each other, which leads to some cool interactions in the game. And the heads at the tree, you can go to the tree and you can ask it for something, and the tree extracts a price in return. And Elias has done this in the story of Diablo in the tree, and then he's tried to cheat that contract essentially. And ultimately, the tree gets its contract fulfilled.
And then the head too.
Yeah.
I suppose the trees have existed for a very, very long time.
Yeah.
Does he have any significant powers other than giving knowledge?
The tree? I think we established some of the powers of the tree in Diablo IV, and I think it's a very cool element in terms of it's unclear exactly the extent of the tree's powers, and I think we like that ambiguity. But that element of knowledge, as we see in the story, can be incredibly powerful, right? Ultimately, Lorath interacts with the tree, and that leads to the knowledge that leads to the end of the game. So it plays a key role, even though it's not granting a sword or...
he did grant me a legendary.
Yeah, and that's what I like about the tree is that, like Joe said, it led to a greater event up the end of the story, and then even towards the end game, at the back of your head, you still have the lore happening. You still kind of treat the tree not just as a board. So as you go to the sanctuaries, I think you always get to think, how does the tree know this depth of the sanctuary? Why is it giving me all these loots? What does it want me to do? So I think it has that suspense going on even in the end game. It's not just a repetitive mechanic. It's like a living tree, like you mentioned. So I think that was a really interesting touch to an end game that could just simply be a simple mechanic. So.
Where are the Nephalem right now?
Mm-hmm.
It's a big deal in Diablo 3, right? And Diablo 4, they're just not there.
Well, so I talked before about how the story of Diablo 4 is a story about humans contending with forces that are supernatural or incredibly powerful beyond what humans can do. And we felt like in order to tell that story effectively, the player needed to be one of those characters too. We talk a lot about how the player appears in game cutscenes, and that helps the player actually be part of the action. We can tell a story that includes the player in a way that we couldn't before. When you think about how powerful the Nephalem is at the end of Diablo 3, we felt like that would undermine the story that we wanted to tell about human struggles.
When Trail Whispers first introduced, they're like, oh, you want something, you gotta pay a price. It sounds really like something that is dark arts or dark magic or something. So did anyone in the team actually go and study the ancient dark arts or some ancient history or stuff like that?
Not that I'm aware of. We didn't take a team trip to... the people on the Diablo team are all people who sort of are interested in dark fantasy, and a lot of the dark stories have become very popular in mainstream culture lately. To some extent, Diablo 4 is a reflection of how that's been something that people have become really interested in. So, I think a lot of members of the team love those kinds of stories as well.
And what I really like about the stories, obviously, there's an interesting darkness or something that I want to chime into. We've cultivated a culture where everybody can talk about anything about the game. I could go to the narrative director and be like, hey, why is the story that? So we really try to cultivate it. So I feel like just having the various voices coming together as one really contributed a lot to this vibrant story that we have in the game.
I suppose I want to talk more about ending stuff. Right?
Sure, yeah.
So I felt it's amazing. So the Codex of Power, right? So when you extract the power, then you can imprint on something else. So I imprint on something, then I couldn't extract it anymore.
Oh, yes.
It's on purpose, right?
Yeah, being able to extract a legendary power is incredibly versatile and incredibly powerful. Of course, you can move it to a different slot as well. So you can have, if you have two pairs of boots that both have powers you want, previously you would have to choose which one you wanted. But now you can take the power off one of the boots and move it to something else and have them both at once, right? So it's incredibly powerful, but we do want to have some constraints on it. And that's where the Codex of Power comes in too, right? Because for many of the legendary powers, many of them are exclusive to legendaries, but there are quite a few, 100 or so Codex of Power entries. So you can go complete a dungeon, unlock that Codex of Power, and then you can always have that aspect available to imprint on gear. But it allows you to, let's say that you have a build where, maybe having a barrier is really key to your build. As you're upgrading your gear, you're swapping out slots, and with the Codex of Power, you can make sure that that barrier comes with you so that your build doesn't sort of fall apart as you're equipping new items.
And I think that's really cool because now not only unique and legend gear is important, because you can always find better barrier gear to imprint whatever you want to imprint, for example, the barrier. So there's just a lot more different ways for you to really imagine how you want to go about your build, which I think is also really interesting.
I also realized that refining skills, especially if you refine all of them, really expensive at the end of the game.
So we've been tuning the respec costs throughout development. And again, as a live service, it's something that we'll continue to monitor. What we want is for the cost to respec to be something that making some choices about what kind of character you want to be, so that it doesn't feel like you're just everything and you have to sort of go through some inventory or some UI management to like, I'm an everything sorcerer, right? Like we want to have some definition of your build, and the cost helps with that. But we don't want the cost to be so prohibitive that you feel like you're locked into one. And so we've been tuning that cost, and we'll continue to tune it as it goes forward.
The other thing I want to talk about is the enchanting cost. The first enchanting cost, I think it was like maybe 50k gold, and the next one was like a couple 100k gold. So it's ridiculous expensive.
True. Well, the system is similar to from Diablo 3, where you could reroll affixes. If the cost to reroll the affix does not go up each time you re-roll it, you end up in sort of a gameplay loop that's kind of degenerate. Sometimes this happens in games where you have plenty of whatever it is, and you're sort of going through the motions of like everyone, that you're eventually going to get exactly the thing you want, but you have to push this button 400 times for it to happen.
Maybe 300 times.
Many times, right? With that, we want there to be some aspect of tension there, where you've got quite a bit of power to customize the item to be more the way you want, but not unlimited power. As the sort of cost goes up, you're like, well, is this one good enough? Like, I know I wanted critical strike, but I got critical damage, and that's pretty good. Like maybe, I don't know. Also, as you're getting more and more higher level and you're getting more gold, you can also always come back to that and say, oh, you know what? Actually, I am going to re-roll that a few more times now that I have more gold.
Yeah, and now that we have various endgame features that you can play around with, Altai, the tree, and then also the Nightmare Dungeon. So although you won't be able to re-roll based on the cost, you have just many different ways to look for that loot, look for that feature, look for that attribute that you wanted. I think that's what we want the players to continuously enjoy the world of Sanctuary and exploring them.
You have anything you want to tell us?
Well, one of the things that a key part of our Diablo IV development, our philosophy, is to make sure that when people pick up Diablo IV, that there are things in there for people who've played the previous game, right? Like you see Lorath in Diablo 3, Reaper of Souls. If you've played that and you meet him in that cabin, that's meaningful to you. And then you get to go on this whole adventure with him, right? But at the same time, if you've never played a Diablo game before, when you jump into Diablo 4, the story tells you everything you need to know about these characters. Lorath is developed in Diablo 4, even if you haven't played Diablo 3. If you play Diablo 3, then you get this extra fun and sort of recognition of some of these characters. But a new player who's never played any Diablo can jump into Diablo 4, have a great time, get engaged by the story, and get engaged by the lore. And maybe you go play another Diablo game after that, and that's great. But you don't have to. You can jump right in.
One really cool mechanic that I think we have as lore and as a narrative, you understanding Lilith, it's not just us giving you a wall of text and then making you read it. It's actually having that connection through that event in the chapel and then you actually really diving deep into what Lilith is facing, what she wants to do with her sons and daughters. So I think that kind of mechanic of hand-holding in a natural way was also a good mechanism for even like newer players to really understand what's happening in D4. And on top of that, if you knew Diablo, there were a lot of elements that you could kind of back up on. And going back to Joe's comment, that it wasn't like necessary for you to understand previous story.
I think it's was thanks for the interview, thanks for the time, thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Thank you. We're glad to talk to you.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for watching our videos. Don't forget to give us a subscribe if you'd like to see more, and like so we know what kind of content you want to see. Got suggestions for new content? Let us know in the comments below too. Thank you so much again for watching. Take care, dudes.